Okay, I should also pray, and I remind you to pray for Michelle as an operation coming up. And I'm sure that will turn out well, because there's an awful lot of skill out there, under the surgeon's knife even. So keep that in your prayers. We were just thanking our good friends, the Warrens on my left, for their prayers and many others too, while we were on that trip to Turkey, to Romania, to Germany, France, Switzerland, where we saw the statue of Michael Servet, that was in Annemasse, close to Geneva, and a very beautiful little bronze statue of a pathetic man with his hand under his chin, looking into the future wistfully, and then some sort of statement that this was Calvin's fault, that we say we admit that's not a good idea. However, Calvin was a man of his times, and that's what you did in those days. If you had a heretic on your hands, and you burned him at the stake. And it then shows the place where probably he was actually burned. People don't think about that. That's an atrocious thing. So we're using the text in 1 John 2:15 or so, where it says that nobody who murders has God in his life. No murderer has the life of the age to come. So that's unthinkable. We always remind ourselves then of the difficult issue of war. I get that. That's not easy. But we need to think seriously about whether Jesus would join the army and kill people. That's a serious question. We don't want to belabor it, but it is obviously something to reflect on. Okay, we're here then in the 3rd chapter. Let me start, if I may, with 3:1. I'm reading the New American Standard Updated Version. It's a good translation, good as many, like the RSV and so on. Even the Catholic Bible, NAB, is generally very good. NIV is very Trinitarian. So if you have the marginal references, that's a great help to your study. 3:1 goes like this, and the title here is Godly Living. Good text. In the same way, you wives, be submissive to your own husbands, so that even if any of them are disobedient to the word, they may be won without a word by the behavior of their wives. Verse 2. Verse 2 of 3, chapter 3.
As they observe, by watching your pure, godly behavior.
Right.
Your adornment must not be merely external, braiding the hair and wearing gold jewelry or putting on dresses.
But it should be in the hidden person of the heart, in the incorruptible adornment of a gentle and quiet spirit, which is of the highest value in the sight of God.
For in this way, in former times, the holy women also, who hoped in God, used to adorn themselves, being submissive to their own husbands.
Just as Sarah obeyed Abraham, calling him Lord, and you have become her children if you do what is right without being frightened by any fear.
You husbands, be in the same way, live with your wives in an understanding way as of someone weaker, since she is a woman, and show her honor as a fellow heir of the grace of life, so that your prayers will not be hindered.
Wow, that's an amazing section. It's not one that I've read thousands of times. I tend to brush over that stuff. But if you analyze the words there, they're rather striking. So, what do we want to say about that? Anybody got a comment out there before we start?
Well, I think it's interesting. I've always thought, and I have studied this.
Yeah.
I've always thought it's interesting, the responsibility on the side of the woman is of submission.
Yeah.
And I think it's the same in Ephesians.
Yeah.
And the responsibility on the man is about respect and honor because of the weaker sex. Now I can understand how Paul may come across nowadays as sexist, quote unquote.
Yeah.
But the facts are the facts. I mean, this is reiterating Ephesians to a stronger sense in Timothy and in Corinthians. So it's clearly a very important teaching for us. The reason I mentioned the responsibilities of each is because I come from a background in the Hispanic Spanish world where the submission of the woman, which is her responsibility, is distorted in such a way that even if the man starts disrespecting and dishonoring her, you know, the ladies of the past and the tradition
Yeah.
in Spanish, they say, yeah, but the Bible tells you, daughter or whatever, the mothers used to tell this to their daughters, where I come from.
Yeah.
You have to submit. I mean, it's very crooked. So
It is. And it certainly was the case in my mother's time that you had the word obey in the marriage ceremony. You promised before God and man to obey your husband. That word is in there. My mother insisted on that. In her generation, she was biblically oriented enough to feel that that needed to be said. Today, many object to that. I think, didn't I read that the royal who's about to be married or got married recently, he didn't have that in his...
Well, I don't think we had it. Did we have it?
I
Did
don't
you
know.
have it? Did anyone
I don't
have
know,
anything
too
of
long
it?
ago.
Things have changed.
I don't remember that.
we
wedding.
conveniently don't remember.
Well, I don't.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
Well, Paul has some less things to say to the men than he does to the women, I think, if you add up the words. That means nothing. The words to the men are just as salient and just as telling. It's in the same way. So what's in the same way there?
Back
Well-
to the page, the previous chapter.
Yes, what would you give us there?
Okay. Go
Please.
to, I read a little bit this morning.
Yes.
1 Peter 2:13
Yes.
explains that,
Yes.
a part of it.
Yes.
Submit yourselves, for the Lord's sake, to every human institution, whether to a king as one of authority, or to governors as sent by him for the punishment of evildoers and praise of those who do right. Then in Luke 2:51 it talks about, well, and drop down to 18, servants, employees, be submissive to your boss, your master,
Yeah.
with all respect, not unto those who are good and gentle, but also unreasonable.
Yes.
And then in Luke 2:51 had cross-reference back to Christ submitted to his parents. Remember when he got
That's exactly
laws.
right. Right. So you cannot get rid of the hierarchy here.
No,
it's
it's-
impossible, isn't it?
It's submission. It's all about submission.
Yes.
You know, there used to be a saying, I think you have to learn to follow before you can lead.
I would think that's right. Yes.
Yeah,
Sounds
because,
good.
you know, that's
Yeah.
just a principle,
Right.
really. Because if you can't follow orders, you probably can't give orders.
That's right.
Now I'm speaking more or less from a military point, but that's
Yeah.
the principle.
Well, there is a hierarchy here.
Yeah.
I got to thinking as we travelled on the Turkish Airlines, what a miracle this is. They're taking this huge bus, you know, for hours across the sky, down to the piece of cucumber in the meals they prepared. The detail is terrifying. And that gets to me because I tend to be the muddle through British style. That's the way we do it. Americans are, perhaps if they're characterized by anything particular, these generalizations are not really fair. But Americans say, I want point 1, point 2, point 3. Tell me how to convert somebody. I get this on email. What point you make? Well, there's a place to do that. There's also a kind of feel your way along and see what happens approach. You do it by trying. So different approaches psychologically. But there's no question that there is a hierarchy here. Being submissive in the way that we're submissive to God. We have to obey what the policeman says. I get that. I like the sense of law and order, don't you? The idea of shaking your fist at the authorities publicly. I know that's free speech, but that is a dangerous thing when it's overplayed for me. Too much free speech, too much tweeting, too much wild language, as we know. So in the same way, as you rightly point out, in the same way as detailed for us in relation to God, us in relation to all the authorities, wives, you wives, submit to your own husbands. There is some element of submission there. How you work that exactly in every case, I think every marriage has to work that out because people are different in personalities. Sometimes you get husbands who are in some ways less equipped to lead than their wives. That can happen. Or vice versa. So how you balance all that, I think, would be a challenge. And certainly women are not chattels in the Bible. There were women who were business ladies, you know that. Lydia. In fact, the women do rather well. The women are the ones supporting the ministry of Jesus. Where were the men? They're out fishing or something. So the women are certainly not just chattels. They're highly educated in the Bible, some of them, right? I get that. And today they have equal opportunity. That sounds right to me. Provided they can do the work of home, and the main work, of course, is the bringing up of the children. I've noticed that the women bear the children and the men don't. I've noticed that. That's a very important distinction. There are built-in distinctions which have to be reckoned with.
Glad you noticed.
Was that? Glad you noticed that. I'm not getting to be very observant in my old age. Yes.
Well,
That's all I ask you that.
Yeah.
God created men and women, and He knows what our emotions are.
Mm-hmm.
and He knows what works.
Yes.
So in the Scripture, He's
Yeah.
telling us what will work.
Exactly right. But it's not well done, because even in Georgia, in the Bible-believing group, the divorce rate is about the same as it is outside. That's startling, isn't it? So it isn't working in churches. That's a different subject.
Can I ask about
Yep.
the submission here?
Mm.
Is interesting because women are told to submit even more so maybe when it's an unbelieving spouse.
Yep.
Is that fair to say?
Well, he's taking that particular aspect of it in that verse, certainly. The wives
So-
are to be submissive to your own husbands in general. That's
In general,
yes, of
yeah.
course.
Now,
That's
yeah,
a
you
leading
said this
principle.
is difficult because,
Yeah.
especially nowadays. So, if I'm a woman, practically, how do I go about it? Like, so my husband
yeah.
becomes an unbeliever, is an unbeliever, yet I'm supposed to, in general, submit
Yes.
to
Sure.
my husband.
Well, that's the point he makes here. That if you've got an unbelieving mate, you're more likely to win them by carrying out the submissive.
By keep submit.
course.
So
Yes, I think so, particularly in that case. But it's
Right.
certainly a general statement, isn't it?
what's that look like there?
Well, each
Like up
each,
to what point? Like
Yes.
you said, it's difficult to
If-
see.
Well, we know that if the unbelieving mate leaves, then you have a right to divorce
1 Corinthians
and then
7.
remarriage. That's the passage in 1 Corinthians 7. That's clear. That marriage is something which is indissoluble, except for Matthew 19, where adultery or fornication is committed, let's call it adultery, ongoing, unrepentant, without any chance of coming back. Then you have a right to divorce. And if you have a right to divorce, you have a right to remarry. One of the mistakes that's out there we need to try to correct is that when you're divorced, you're not married. That should be clear. Jesus in Matthew 19, we'll mention this now, he wasn't asked about, can I have a separation for any reason? He was asked about, can we have a divorce? That's important. The meaning of words is so important. Not just can we get separated, because there are Church of God people who got that wrong, and they said, no, if you're married until life comes to an end. And there's no exception. And the divorce exception is not a divorce exception, it's a separation exception. That's just wrong. So, first point is that if you're divorced legally, and 1 Corinthians 7, that's to say your mate leaves and there's no chance. Then I think you have a right to remarriage. It appears to me that's the best view of all that. And the other exception is in Matthew 19, if adultery is committed against that marriage. I get that.
So it looks like
Mm.
Paul here is trying to maintain that
Oh, yes.
commandment from the Lord to
Absolutely.
almost
Yeah.
at all costs
Yes.
maintain the marriage.
That's right.
Almost.
That's right.
Obviously, physical violence.
That's
Obviously,
right.
Obviously, right?
Yes.
I mean,
Well,
it
that's
should
right.
go without saying, but we have to say that.
Oh,
Yes,
yes.
if you're getting beaten up,
Yes, you have to leave.
Yes.
Get out to
Get out.
escape your life.
but but it's someone's asking here,
Yeah.
Anthony, how
Yeah.
can we harmonize, or
Yes.
is the thing in Genesis 3 of
Mhm.
any importance when it comes to this?
Yeah.
Where it says this difficult verse, I guess 3:16. The punishment for the woman is childbearing.
Mm-hmm.
This is when they sin.
Mm-hmm.
And then it says, you will, some translations, your desire will be for your husband,
Mhm.
and who will rule over you.
Well, I take it that is part of the way things are. Your husband has a right to rule over you, and you're supposed to be submissive to your husband. That's part of what happened at the fall, isn't it? I don't think there's any mystery to that. And the childbearing is a reminder, as we keep saying, we're in a laboratory in which the whole of this scene is typical and pictures our spiritual life, doesn't it? Born again, all these things are. So the childbearing, the agony of childbearing, takes us back to the awful mistakes that were made. What else can I say? It
So
appears
wait,
to say
you
that.
just said the husband is supposed to rule the,
In the sense that,
in the sense of...
yes, I think the sense that's depicted here, he has an authoritative position over his wife. But that had better be handled with extreme care, because if it becomes brutal, and Paul, let's go through this briefly. Paul clearly says if you have two believers who are married, there's no right to divorce. Forget that. We ran into a case of that, unfortunately, and had to deal with it. If you have two believers, I repeat this, two genuine believers, and they're married as Christians, then divorce is impossible. And he even says, if one of them were to leave, heaven forbid, they are not to marry someone else but get reconciled. That's quite clear. They're to remain unmarried. And people say, well, that means they're free to remarry. No, expressly not. Somebody even dared to quote the Roman law as favouring, freedom to get out of a marriage, which Paul didn't allow for, among two believers. That's clear. So if one of them should leave, or, as you say, if somebody's being beaten, they've got to get out of there. At that point, I would say the believer has become an unbeliever. If they were ever a believer, if they're beating their wife and using violence, that's the end of it. They're not anymore a believer. So if they leave, then I think the woman has complete freedom to marry again, because the believer has become an unbeliever, and that can happen. That seems to be the way it is.
Can I read that passage?
Yes, please.
Corinthians.
Yes, please do.
For those who are not married,
Yes.
for the widows I say this, it's good for you to stay single like me.
Mm-hmm.
But if you cannot control your body, then
Yeah.
you should marry.
Yeah.
It's better to marry than to burn with sexual desire.
Mm-hmm.
Now I have a command for those who are married.
Yes.
Actually, it's not from me, it's from what the Lord Jesus
Yes.
commanded. A wife should not leave her husband.
Yes.
But if a wife does leave,
Mm-hmm.
she should remain single
Yes.
or get back together with her husband,
Yes.
and a husband should not divorce his wife.
That's very clear. Now, people have twisted that text by saying she should remain single, that Paul is supposed to be saying if she's not married. That's not what he means. She should remain on her own and not get married to somebody else is the point there. Clearly, right? Remaining single doesn't mean she's divorced. The exact opposite point here. She's not divorced. She's not free to remarry. She's not to marry someone else. She is to either remain on her own or get reconciled to her husband.
Well, the key there is Paul calls the other person that they're returning to,
Yes.
the spouse.
Yes.
Still,
Good point.
he says
Yes.
they get back with her husband.
Yes.
So in Paul's mind, they're not divorced.
No, of course not.
He says, yes, leave for a time, I'm guessing,
That's right.
extreme
Yes.
circumstances,
Yes.
and then get back with your husband.
That's right.
So
Two of
obviously
those
there
two-
has not been a divorce there.
Yes. I think that's absolutely clear. Certainly then you have no right to remarriage as long as you're both believers. That's out of the question. You have to seek counselling, whatever. You've got to get together. But let her remain on her own. That's not married to someone else. That's what that means. Either stay on her own until it's reconcilable, or get get straight with your husband or wife. That's very clear.
A lot of comments here.
Yes.
Omar
Hmm.
in Texas, I think he's Spanish. Hispanic women do suffer in relationships to their husbands, many of them, but not all.
Yes, of course.
Let's see, women should be careful. Michelle says women should be careful to become married to a man that they will be willing to they will
Yes.
not be willing. I think he wanted to say not willing to submit to.
Read the sentence again, if you would.
Women
Women?
should be careful to become married to
Yep.
a man that they will be willing to
Yes.
submit to.
Yes.
So,
Yes,
That's correct. Yes, we'll be willing to. Yes, of course.
yeah, that's why I don't know if you want to talk about the other commandment to not marry outside the faith.
Right.
The-
Paul obviously says you should marry or remarry if you're free to remarry. You should marry in the faith. That's the ideal thing. In many cases that doesn't happen, and it ought to, but it doesn't happen, and then that leads to more problems. Hopefully then you can convert your prospective mate before you get married, or if not, as the case is here, by your very wonderful behavior, either the man or the woman, you win the other one. So that's exciting when that happens.
By the way, Michelle was a
Yeah.
wedding planner. so
Absolutely, she knows all about weddings and marriages, yes. So, it covers that
I
ground.
want to make a remark about
Yes.
something he had mentioned earlier about this can happen where the man reads the verse.
Yes.
And he's the head.
Yes.
Okay. But there's another verse that kind of counterbalances. It says, "Husbands, love your wives
Yes.
as Christ loved the church,
That's right.
and He gave His life for it." So that's, to me, is the counterbalance of
Absolutely.
this. It can happen. I understand.
Don't
And I guess I have to be careful.
Don't be
I'm
overbearing.
the boss.
Yes.
I'm in charge.
Oh, yes.
So that one counterbalances.
Right.
I said, you love your wives
Yes.
as Christ
As
loved
Christ
the church.
loved the
Then you
church.
have to say how Christ loved the church when He was willing to die for it.
exactly right.
So, yeah,
So
I think
there are no excuses here on either side available.
I think it's this. That's why it's so important. The requirements of the elder, of the leader in the church. There are leaders, by the way, in the church. Because the church we're supposed to submit to. That's also being lost with this.
Yes.
Oh no, there's no leaders. We all teach. No, there are leaders.
Yes.
There should be. But that's why it's so important. The comparison Paul makes with the church and your home. He says if you're not in controlling your home,
yes,
and obviously in control, I guess these words, rule, control have negative context, but in the good way,
in the right way,
right? Handling your children, if you have children, being in good stead with your wife. Can I read Ephesians 5?
Yes, please.
Husbands, you should love your wives in the same way as Messiah loved the church and gave himself for it. He made it holy. He made it clean by washing in the water of the word, is your paraphrase, so that he could make the church his own with no flaw or blemish or any kind of fault, but holy and blameless. Husbands should love their wives, again twice, like this, as they love their own bodies. A man who loves his wife loves himself. After all, no one ever hated his own body. Well, I don't know about that. But
now you're arguing with Paul.
Anyway,
that's good. I think we've covered the bases here.
I'm going to look in the mirror.
Jesus was asked the direct question, as we know in Matthew 19, can we have a divorce for any reason? Because after all, Jesus, you know what Moses said? Well, actually, we don't fully know what Moses said. It isn't quite clear what that exception was. It doesn't matter, because whatever it was, it's gone. And so Jesus then takes them back to Genesis, and he says, Moses allowed you to have divorces for certain reasons, which are not entirely clear. Doesn't matter, because that's gone. People want to argue, well, what was that? Forget that. That's not for us now. Jesus then said, but I'm telling you, in advance of Moses, he's going beyond Moses, isn't he? Which is fascinating to me. He's discounting Moses, as later on Paul develops that theme a lot. So you have only one exception that Jesus gives, and then Paul adds a second one. You have two exceptions. One is where you have unrepented, continuing, unforgiven, breaking the sexual bond. That's quite clear. And secondly, where you have an unbelieving mate who just leaves, then you are not, as one commentator says, you're not bound to chase that leaving or departing person around the Roman Empire to keep the marriage together. I get it. But apart from that, there is no excuse or reason for divorce. That's very clear. That's the standard evangelical view, by the way. We're not saying anything terribly wild. What is wrong is where you forbid second marriages on every account. That leads to fornication very often. And Paul did say it's better to be single in view of what he sees, the impending end of the age. I think we're not quite bound by that. I see the end of the age in some way, but not quite as urgently as Paul did. However that works. But you're to obey it by marrying in the faith. That's very clear. I think we covered the ground very well. Good. Now, what else?
Verse 7. Usually I have to watch my own New Living Translation because it can be quite weak.
Yes.
But Bob read this verse, and if I remember correctly, he said fellow heirs. But mine seems to be stronger in this case because mine says equal partners.
Yes.
And I just find that stronger.
That is, I think yours is right. The fellow heirs, we are absolutely equal.
When it comes to salvation.
Yes, when it comes to salvation, absolutely. Yeah, we're fellow heirs of the grace of life, which is given us now in part. But one thing I find in emails week by week, people are very bad at balancing the text. They're not thinking like Hebrews. People look out at those temple buildings, and Jesus says they're all going to fall down. And then you find him discussing a future temple building. That throws people. They can't deal with it. You've got to think like a Hebrew, which grasps a totality. Think about the episode in Isaiah 7, where, behold, a virgin will conceive and bear a child. That wasn't a literal virgin there. But Matthew comes along and says, it is now, in the case of Jesus. Can you handle that? Oh, he's contradicting Isaiah. Well, wait a minute, that's not right. You grasp a totality. That episode in the time of Isaiah and Ahaz was a virginal thing in some sense. She wasn't a virgin. Literally, a well-known young lady was going to bear a child. That's not the end of the story. There's a further and second fulfillment. Same with the Matthew 24. The fall of the temple in 70 AD as it turns out, was not the one that led to the end of the age. Can you grasp that? Jesus then says, you people in front of me killed Abel. They didn't. Can you handle that? It's a corporate thinking in groups, not picking everything apart all the time. I think that's a major cause of
I love verse 4.
Yes.
Your beauty should come from inside.
Yes.
The beauty of a gentle and quiet spirit.
Yes.
I would apply that to men too.
Well, certainly it would be a nice quality for men as well. Gentle, quiet spirit.
Self-control.
Why not?
And all that.
Absolutely.
Good stuff.
Which is precious in the sight of God. He likes the look of that. That's back to my Jeremiah text. I'll repeat it for you as a key text to get up in the morning to think about. God has made the heavens and the earth, put the animals on the earth, and he's going to give the earth to those who are pleasing in his sight. Or it may be rendered equally well, I'll give the earth to those whom I choose to give it to. It's the same idea, right? Isn't that terrific? How about being given the earth? I don't think Fox News is dealing with this well at all. I don't hear them discussing this. So I'm saying to people now, what are you going to be doing in 40 trillion years? That's the only question that matters. You might live another 25, 30 years. That's great too. You can go to the gym and get fit and do well and then live some more years. That's wonderful. What are you going to be doing in a million years? That's the only question that counts, isn't it? The immortality question. Well, God is planning to give you the earth. That's nice. Is that worth being instructed about? I would think it is. But Fox News is not, much less CNN. They're even further than that. Fox News makes some semblance of an attempt to, give us a standard in some areas. That's wonderful. They're even against abortion. Praise God for that. You won't hear CNN against abortion, so they're at a level even less believing than Fox News in some way. However, the real question is immortality, isn't it? So what's being said about that? Not clearly. Why? Because the immortal soul has swamped everything.
Go on.
We got.
We'll
move on to the rest of our chapters. We won't get to all of it. Part of what I'm trying to do is here to mention a whole lot of things. Remember, these films are out there forever. So people will happen upon it and they'll hear something that strikes them as interesting. So I'm covering a lot of bases, which can get too much, I know. Okay, Sarah obeyed Abraham. That's the strongest text, by the way. Sarah obeyed Abraham, calling him Lord, calling him Adoni, as Messiah is called Adoni in Psalm 110:1, calling him Lord, my Lord. And you have become her children, figuratively speaking, obviously not literally, but figuratively speaking, if, that is, you do what is right without being frightened by any fear. So you're not to be scared of your mate, that's out of the question. You husbands, the same way. Live with your wives in an understanding way, as with a weaker vessel. The word there is a vessel. We're looked at as containers, both men and women, and we're operating in different spheres, obviously. And she's the weaker one. Well, physically, that's certainly often true. Emotionally, it may be quite the opposite sometimes. The husband would be weaker emotionally than her wife, than his wife, her wife, sorry. I got the pronouns mixed up, which you hear now, which isn't a joke. So we're going to get to the sin of angels later in the chapter, and that was a catastrophic event which we're supposed to understand. To sum up then, I like that. Here's my point, verse 8. Let me read 8, or who's going to read 8 for us?
You.
Me, okay. To sum up, all of you would be harmonious, sympathetic, brotherly, kind-hearted, and humble in spirit.
Don't repay evil for evil. Don't retaliate when people say unkind things about you. Instead, pay them back with a blessing. That is what God wants you to do, and he will bless you for it.
For the one who desires life, to love and see good days, must keep his tongue from evil and his lips from speaking deceit.
Stop doing what is wrong. Do good. Look for peace. Do all you can to help people live peacefully.
For the eyes of the Lord are towards the righteous, and his ear attends to their prayer. But the face of the Lord is against those who do evil.
13.
Who is there to harm you if you prove zealous for what is good?
But even if you should suffer for the sake of righteousness, you are blessed. And do not fear their intimidation, and do not be troubled.
Yes. In 15, but sanctify Messiah as Lord in your hearts, always being ready to make a defense to everyone who asks you to give an account for the hope that is in you with gentleness and reverence. 16.
But you must do this in a gentle and respectful way. Keep your conscience clear. Then, if people speak evil against you, they will be ashamed when they see what a good life you live, because you belong to Christ.
For it is better if God should will it. Sorry, 17.
For it is better if God should will it so that you suffer for doing what is right rather than for doing what is wrong.
Christ himself suffered when he died for you, and with that one death he paid for your sins. He was not guilty, but he died for people who are guilty. He did this to bring all of you to God. He was put to death, but made alive by the Spirit.
Put to death, and you left a few words out, or maybe I didn't.
Yeah, because it's paraphrases.
I
Oh,
didn't-
not your. I'm reading from. Let me read yours.
Yeah, 18. Having been put to
Messiah
death.
was put to death as a mortal human being,
good.
but made alive again by resurrection in the Spirit. It's
Right.
a paraphrase.
That's fine. All right, 19.
In which
Which also.
also he went and made proclamations to the spirits now in prison.
Okay.
Who once were disobedient when the patience of God kept waiting in the days of Noah during the construction of the ark, in which a few, that is 8 persons, were brought safely through the water.
Corresponding to that, baptism now saves you, not the removal of dirt from the flesh, but the fill of God for a good conscience, through the resurrection of Jesus Christ.
Who is at the right hand of God, having gone into heaven after angels, authorities, and powers had been subjected to him. That's an interesting example of doctrine and Christian living to me. You know, people say, I don't want to hear about Christian living. Don't give me any of this doctrine. That is flat out false. Peter does it all together. Jesus does too. So there's a whole lot of stuff about Jesus traveling around the universe, isn't there here? How does that affect Christian living? Massively, because the gospel is understanding what God is doing, coming into line with his great plan. So this is marvelous doctrine and Christian living, the whole thing, marvelous, inspired material for me. And it's, I can promise you, the cause of massive confusion in the commentaries. Little point of translation in verse 19, in which also Jesus went and made proclamation to the spirits in prison, not the spirits now in prison. No word there now. They're trying to lead you on. They're trying to make you think that Jesus went and preached to human beings in the day of Noah, who were alive as human beings when he preached to them, but are now in prison. That's fatally wrong. First of all, Jesus wasn't alive to preach at all in the time of Noah, and so you don't have the word now there in the Greek. It's simply without the now. You don't need the now. They're pushing you into a particular view with the adding the word now. I'll repeat the point. It's complicated until you think about this, but they're trying to get you to believe that Jesus preached to human beings at the time of Noah who are now in prison, but they weren't in prison when they were preached to. So there are a number of things wrong with that. First, in our understanding, Jesus wasn't alive to do any preaching. He wasn't even born, so he couldn't have preached. Aren't they say he preached in the lips of Noah? Well, that's pretty bad too. It doesn't say that. Nothing about Noah preaching here. And Jesus was not alive to do any preaching in the time of Noah. That's quite clear. Secondly, then, you cannot preach to dead human beings. This is where your conditional immortality, believing the dead are dead, is a rescue from massive error, right? You cannot preach to somebody who's dead. Nor can Jesus preach to anybody when he's dead. Is that clear? These are basics that without which it's very difficult to get clarity here. So let's go back to, before we get to it,
Someone said to me online, because funny enough, I've been researching this
good.
Made Alive in the Spirit deal.
Yes.
And going down to
Yes.
ladies and stuff.
Yes.
Someone said to me, Jesus did not do anything without his body.
That's right. It's very good.
That was
He was nobody without his body. That's what it is. So you cannot preach to the dead human beings because they are unconscious. And Jesus cannot preach when he wasn't alive in the time of Noah and he cannot preach when he, Jesus, is dead. Without those premises, though, this is a big fog, believe me, and all the commentators, many of them, are completely in disagreement about much of this. I don't think it's that hard.
Yeah, let me read
Yep.
quickly Ellicott's.
Yes.
So there are a number of ways, obviously, to understand this. He went and preached to the spirits in prison. The spirits are understood as being now in prison, and it was in spirit, i.e., mystically speaking, our Lord Himself, who, in and through the person of Noah, preached repentance to
Yes.
the old world.
Yes.
Wow.
There are a number of mistakes there from which you are saved because of your belief.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Jesus wasn't alive there, so forget that. It says nothing about Jesus preaching through the lips of Noah. No, that's not right. And you cannot preach to dead people. And Jesus, when he was dead, cannot preach either. This is to show that doctrine matters very much. If you haven't got that framework right, then this is a grand muddle, and it is in the commentaries.
So two
Yeah.
things here, interesting. So two things they're trying to kill two birds with one
Yes.
stone. So they're hitting on the pre-existence, literal, and they're also getting rid of the identity of the spirits in prison
Yes.
as other than
That's
human.
And they're also
Right.
suggesting that mortal human beings who are dead can be preached to, and they're also suggesting that Jesus could have preached when he was dead before he was resurrected. So you've got four different things, really, which are made clear if you get this right, I think.
Well, according to Psalms and
Yeah.
Ecclesiastes, the dead weren't listening very well.
David wasn't listening.
That's
very
right.
well.
Well, Kay raises an excellent point. You need, in conversation with others, you need your jugular vein text, right? I hear people in discussion beating about the bush, and this, that, and the other, a million different verses. No, you need a verse that's very clear, in the light of which the more difficult verses are to be understood. So when you say the Father is the only one who is true God, that should settle all arguments. It should, but it doesn't. That's very clear. And she's referring there to Ecclesiastes chapter 5 or 9. Is it 9? What's it wrong? 9, 5 and 10, right? 9. Chapter 9. This is the one to bring to the attention of your friends in the Baptist Church. It says the dead know not anything at all. The living know they're going to die. Well, that's quite unarguable, isn't it? We all know that we're going to die. That's why I'm saying, what will you be doing in 40 trillion years? That's a greater question. Okay, so the dead know nothing at all. And you can embroider that with your Georgian. I won't do it because that's insulting to the beautiful Georgian southern language, but they don't know nothing about nothing. Anyway, that's clear. Is it clear? Let's not argue that. The dead do not know anything. And then 5 verses later, he says, there is no knowledge in Sheol. Sheol is a good Hebrew word to know. Hades in the Greek. Sheol and Hades. There's no knowledge or activity in Sheol or Hades, whichever one. That's where all the dead are. It's gravedom. The whole area of the dead seen as one grave. Nothing's going on there. That ought to be clear, but people are so tied and wedded to their own churches.
Well, the translation hell doesn't help.
It absolutely doesn't help.
Mistranslated as hell.
It's
like
terrible.
Introduced by the King James.
Yes.
Randy brings up John 5:25.
Yes.
Amen. Or truly I tell you, this is Jesus, that the hour is coming
Yes.
and already is, when the dead will hear the voice of the Son of God, and those who hear will come back to life.
Yes. Yeah, that's good
From the
stuff.
graves.
Well, already is. Now, John is way beyond what most people would handle. They always want to do John. You start with the Old Testament and get Matthew, Mark, and Luke right first, and you can deal with John. There is a sense in which resurrection, or being raised spiritually, happens now. That's true. It already is. And you could say that Jesus raised some from the dead. Even then, he did. But the hour is coming in the future when all the rest of the dead are going to come alive. And then people stumble at Revelation 20, which clearly says that the first resurrection is only for the faithful. So the verse to teach your children is 1 Corinthians 15:23, which gives the battle order of resurrection, where Paul spells it out. You cannot get this wrong. Should not. Paul says that Christ was the first to be raised from the dead. Marvelous. Okay, well, what about those people who got raised from the dead in the Old Testament? That wasn't resurrection to immortality. That was resurrection simply to extended life. What would you call that? Rather than resurrection, you would call it what? Revival, if you like. Some other word. It's not resurrection in the absolute sense. Okay, so that's what's going to happen. The time is coming when those who are hearing the voice of the Son of Man speak to them, and they're in the grave, and they're going to wake up And Jesus is the first to have done that. He's the only one so far. Let's argue about only one. Let's not. You all understood. Jesus is the only one who has been raised to immortality thus far. Is that right? Nobody else. Then he says, after that, he doesn't say then. Your translation is wrong. He says then, meaning the next moment. No, no. After that next stage, the Greek is quite expressive. The next stage of resurrection is those who belong to Christ will be raised at his parousia, second coming. Only one second coming. That's very clear. That's when the resurrection of all the faithful will happen. Abraham and Isaac and Jacob and all the prophets will be there, resurrected into the kingdom, and that will happen at the parousia, second coming. No pre-tribulation rapture, that's a fiction, not there at all. That's at the parousia. Then he says, next stage comes the end, presumably in this context, the end of the resurrection scheme. That would be, as you know from Revelation 20, at the end of the 1,000 years, the rest of the dead get to be raised. And some then, even in that group, are given eternal life. That's the wider hope that we talk about. That's very clear. If you haven't got that structure, your Bible reading is a mess. And I in the Church of England had no idea about any of this. I'm not blaming anybody, but we didn't know any of this. So Christianity is, first of all, understanding God's great plan, his immortality plan. You might ask your questions this: what is the big question in the Bible? The answer is not only that God's going to have a wonderful earth that he's going to give to you. Secondly, it is that the words of God and Jesus are the defining factor. All this argument about, is it by faith or works, and what's all that about? Not that hard. It's by obedience to the words of God, period. The whole issue in the Bible is, do you listen to what God says and do it, or don't you? Do you listen to what Jesus, as God's representative, says, do you do it? That's all. Obedience of faith, obedience of faith, obedience of faith. But people are not using these easy verses. It's from the start, Adam and Eve didn't listen, right? And Adam did not then take the challenge to rule the world. That's what he was created for. So guess what? Jesus comes along as the second Adam and says, repent and believe in the kingdom. Of course, let's get the Adam's thing straightened out, right? Do what Adam failed to do. So it's a kingdom message. It's what, are you going to listen to God or not? This is rather simple. And I think the Bible is written for ordinary folk. You don't need PhDs in theology to do this. But they don't use the easy verses most of the time.
Another good distinction
Yes.
is of the resurrection is temporary to
Yes.
immortality.
Yep.
Luke 20, 34.
Yes.
At present, in this age, people marry, are given in marriage, but those who are considered worthy to take part in the age to come.
Yes.
And the resurrection from the dead do
Yes.
not marry and are not given in marriage.
Yes.
They cannot die ever again.
Yes.
They are like the holy angels,
Yes.
children of God, since they are children of the resurrection.
Absolutely. Products then of the resurrection, and they get immortality. They're home and dry. They cannot fail after that. Isn't that wonderful? That's beautiful. The structure, if you haven't got the plan, the structure is really very difficult to read the Bible, isn't it? And that's why we have such chaos. That's why I'm trying to repeat the structure over and over again until people get it entirely clear.
Well, 1 Corinthians 15,
Yes,
I'll bring this up before you
Yes.
move on,
Mm-hmm.
talks about
Yeah.
it's sown a physical body,
Yes.
but it's raised a spiritual body.
Yes.
Of course, talks
That's
about
wonderful.
the physical body's first and the spiritual body.
That's right.
Now, let me ask you, I know this sounds very elementary. The word spiritual, or spirit,
Yeah.
is very confusing, at least in my mind.
Yes.
If that had been translated, it is, buried a physical body, it's raised a mortal body, or something like that.
Yeah.
To me,
That would be.
would ring my bell quicker than spiritual. Spiritual is kind of one of those words to me, it's very hard to define.
It has a range of different meanings, that's true. And what is interesting about that one is that that's the opposite of Plato. Plato doesn't think of an immortal spiritual body. He thinks of immortal soul. So this is really hitting at the heart of Platonism. And so this Greek here, soma pneumatikon, that's a body which is spiritual, sounds like a contradiction. It's not. Because God doesn't deal in invisible, non-corporeal things. That has to go out of the window before you start this. So absolutely, that's a rare expression, but it's right. Then what does he say? Jesus has now become a life-imparting spirit. A spirit person. He is a spirit person, no question. But he's imparting life. He not only has life, but he's imparting it to others. That's what Jesus now is, as an immortalized man. I think if this is not clear in people's minds, it's awfully hard.
Since you're there, Bob,
Yes.
I always bring up verse 46, 1 Corinthians 15.
Yeah.
The spiritual did not come first,
Right.
but the natural, the spiritual came after that. I was reading the Word Biblical Commentary, which it amazes me that they're right on this.
Yes.
On the, if anyone wants to look at it, on 1 Peter, volume 49. Anyway, the point they make is a simple point that the passage here in 1 Timothy 3, sorry, 1 Timothy,
1 Peter 3.
1 Peter, so if you look at the commentary, I'll just bring it up for people to see.
Okay.
I just got a little quote from it.
Yeah.
So it says, the statement, Christ was made alive in the Spirit,
Yes.
means simply that he was raised from the dead, not as a spirit, but bodily, as resurrection always is in the New Testament. And then they go on to make the point that it's not two parts of Jesus.
Right.
It's not spirit and body, or spirit and or body and soul. The one spirit energizes or reanimates, resurrects the other, the flesh or the body, if you will.
Even our friend there gets a little confused. It's not as a spirit. That contradicts what's later said in that same chapter. Jesus is now a life-imparting spirit. So he was indeed resurrected to be a life-imparting spirit. But apart from that sentence, he does well. It's interesting. Life-imparting spirit.
Resurrected in flesh and bone.
Yes. Yes.
That's
right.
This is where it gets very confusing.
That's right.
Because tying the word spiritual with it.
It is.
Well, Jesus actually says there,
immorally, but
right. I'm not a ghost. I've got flesh and bones.
I'm not a spook.
I'm not a spook.
yeah.
It is hard, but the Platonism is killing us. Plato has so saturated our minds with that. But don't forget the one that Jesus is now a life-imparting spirit, meaning a non-mortal human person, but he's still corporeal, obviously, otherwise he can't come back visibly.
Yeah, he's imparting, giving, sending, whatever you want to look at it, the Spirit of God.
Yes.
The influence of God, the gifts of God. It doesn't mean he's a disembodied spirit. He's a life-giving spirit, but it's right to say that, as the WBC says, that you can't separate the two as if they're two parts of the one individual.
No, that's right. I'm not sure what they do in the Word Bible is right, by the way. The public doesn't know that. They don't read stuff like that. And the local preacher doesn't read it probably. But much of it's
And this passage, Anthony, from 13, you were talking about Christian living.
Yes.
The passage about do not, basically reiterating, love your enemy.
Yes.
Right? Do not repay evil for evil. So only an enemy would try and do evil to you.
Yeah.
So don't do that. I think you brought up Christian living, but I think this is the highest form of Christian living.
It is.
Standard. We are always told to meet. You know, in Peter, in Jesus, obviously. In other parts of the Bible, it's reiterated, Romans 12, that this is the goal of us to reach that very high standard. Not just, like you say, don't kick the dog or whatever, be good to Aunt Bessie.
It's not being a jolly good chap at all. It's much more than being a jolly good chap.
Yeah, it's being different from the world.
Absolutely.
Because in the world, if you hit me, I'll hit back,
Of
right?
course.
But that's why now it comes to me, highest Christian living standard.
It is.
There is.
It is. And it's very tough. Nobody's suggesting this is easy when you've got good men going out there to die for you and shed their blood, and you're not willing to go and add to the battle yourself. That is very hard, I see it. I'm struck, though, with the fact that Jesus condemned the defensive sword when Peter tried to whack the ear off the high priest. He was told to put up that sword. That was a defensive sword even. And then he goes on to make a very general statement, because let me tell you, everybody who takes the sword will perish with the sword. That's rather frightening, that one. I wouldn't recommend it. Be very sure that you're quite sure that Jesus would join the army and kill other people. If you're sure of that, go for it. Be cautious. You might wind up in horrible disobedience to Jesus, and that's the one thing we cannot afford to do. So, yes, that's an interesting point. Okay, so this is clear then. Jesus died for sins in 18. Here's the non-Christian living thing, if you like. What's all this about? This is major, major cosmic event here. Christ, Messiah, died. He couldn't be God, you tell your friends. The immortal God cannot die, this is verse 18. Messiah also died for sins. Once for all, it doesn't have to be repeated. The just for the unjust. That I would call substitutionary atonement. Our Socinian friends didn't think that Jesus died as a substitute. They thought he only died as a good model of compassion. That's certainly also true. But the substitution is here, as is also in Mark 10:15, where Jesus died in our place. That seems to be quite clear. Where is he quoting from? Isaiah 53? From
I was going to ask Anthony.
Yeah.
This debate, everything's a debate.
I know.
Alas. And unfortunately, the early Socinians, Polish brethren, didn't share this view with us.
No.
But how do you get a... How is Isaiah 53, which we're going to read, not a whatever you call it? What was
Substitutionary atonement.
How is that not that?
I know.
That's the whole story there.
It's the whole story. And you're right. And Wayne Grudem, one of the authors of the Tyndale Commentary on 1 Peter, has a special section to make that point. I think impossible to avoid Isaiah 53 is
he
terrific.
died on our...
Yes.
And then Paul talks about like sheep to the slaughter, like he was the sheep, and then he makes comparisons with him as well.
Yes.
He substituted, I'm paraphrasing Paul,
right?
He took the smack, he took the spit in the face, he took the nails in the... That sounds to serve.
Absolutely.
Well, he also said, that Christ is our Passover.
Yes.
We're facing the Passover lamb over there in the Old Testament. Then.
Mm-hmm.
You can see where he is. It does become that substitute.
Yes.
I've never had any problem with that. I mean, I've understood that as a bad.
You've never been a Christian. No, exactly. You were a good Baptist in that point.
But we understood it.
Yeah.
Christ died for our sins.
That's right.
I didn't understand anything about the Lamb of God and all that, but
that's good.
I don't know how you can rationalize your way out of that, which is what the blemish of our Sicilian brothers.
Absolutely. Well, verse 3 is this whole passage, which I think is very clear. In Isaiah 53, he was despised and forsaken of men, a man of sorrows and acquainted with grief, and like one from whom men hide their face, he was despised and we did not esteem him. That's very clear, isn't it? Surely our griefs he himself bore. That sounds like substitution to me. And our sorrows he carried. Yet we ourselves esteemed him stricken. We thought God was afflicting him, right? God must be against him. God's got it in for him. That's what we thought. But he was pierced through, verse 5, for our transgressions. He was crushed for our iniquities. The chastening to produce our well-being fell on him. And by his scourging we are healed. All of us have gone like sheep astray. Each has turned his own way. But the Lord Yahweh, Jehovah, has caused the iniquity of us all to fall on him. I don't know how you avoid that. He was oppressed, he was afflicted, verse 7. He didn't open his mouth and complain. Like a lamb that is led to slaughter, like a sheep that is silent before its shearers, he didn't open his mouth. Verse 8. By oppression and judgment he was taken away. And as for his generation, that's to say his offspring, his produce of children and so on, who considered that he was cut off, didn't have any children, no marriage and so on, out of the land of the living. For the transgression of my people, Isaiah says, to whom the stroke was due. We deserved it, he got it, isn't that right? The stroke of all this punishment was really due to us, but he did it for us. He's done no violence. Look at that, 9. Wait a minute, you just blew the heads off your enemies. Are you absolutely sure that's going to work in the judgment? Be careful. You might have heard this a few times. You still have to be very cautious there. It says he did no violence, nor was there any deceit in his mouth.
Verse 10.
Verse 10. But the Lord was pleased to crush him, putting him to grief. If he would render himself as a guilt offering, he will see his offspring, eventually his spiritual offspring, indeed he will, and does. He will prolong his days, of course. What will he be doing 40 million years? And the good pleasure of Jehovah will prosper in his hand. As a result of the anguish of himself, his soul, his person, he will see it and be satisfied. I would think so. this is a terrific verse, by his knowledge, the righteous one, my servant, will justify the many. Make them right, not wrong. Once they get the knowledge of God and believe all this, then they are right. He will bear their iniquities. Therefore, 12, I will allot him, here's the result of all this, a portion with the great, and he will divide the booty with the strong, because he poured out himself to death, and he was numbered with the transgressors, yet he himself bore the sins of many and interceded for the transgressors. Wow, isn't that amazing? That's worth pondering, isn't it? Read that often.
Some translations
Yes.
in verse 10 have God was pleased to crush him.
Mm-hmm.
What do you mean?
Yes, Lord was pleased to crush him. It was God's will that that happened. God was pleased with his own will, isn't he? He
No,
was
it-
pleased.
Yes, but we hear pleased as.
I'm so thrilled to be doing this.
Yes,
yes, it's
That's
not
the wrong sense of
English,
pleased
no,
there.
it's- yeah.
It's a
Yes.
wrong translation.
Well,
Maybe
it's,
you could
Wrong
say
sense of it.
yes, good
Wrong
pleasure. It
sense.
was God's good pleasure, my translation
Well,
has
that's
it.
it, of course.
No,
That's good
it's-
pleasure.
And the good pleasure of the Lord will prosper in his hand. How about that?
Yeah.
The good pleasure, God's will will prosper in his hand. And he was pleased to do it. I think that God does things that are very painful for God, doesn't he? He was pleased to do it, but it's still very hard. How about seeing your son suffer like that? So one has to allow the language to breathe a little bit, look at different translations possibly there.
And I think
Yes.
there's a problem with thinking about the results.
Yes,
Yes.
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 The
In
pleasing
time,
was-
the result, absolutely. So the good pleasure in verse 19.
Question online: how do we reconcile verse 4 with verse 10?
Well, for is surely our griefs he himself bore, that's substitution. He carried our sorrows. And verse 10, but the Lord was pleased to crush him, putting him to grief. Both things are true.
Yeah, we thought of him as stricken, struck down by God,
Yes.
afflicted, and then verse 10.
We got that wrong. We thought God was punishing him. We didn't know he was punishing him. I wouldn't put it this way. Penal substitute is probably not the right way to put it, as though God deliberately punishes Jesus where we should be punished. I'd rather call it substitutionary. He dies in our sense, in our place, rather, in our place, instead of us. So you can talk about substitutionary atonement, it's obviously, but not necessarily penal substitution. It seems to me not quite the way to express it, that God, I'll punish you. Although he did. I get that, but that needs to be handled with care because people will misunderstand it.
My version says that it was the Lord's good plan to crush him.
That's
rather
nice,
than
much
pleasure.
better.
If there's no
Yeah.
substitution, how is there atonement?
Well, there isn't.
Right?
There
If you
isn't.
don't see this as a substitutionary, there's no atonement.
Yeah.
There can't be.
That's right.
Because Hebrews also, the whole of Hebrews, by the way, it's all about, I would say, substitution.
Absolutely.
It's all about he did this for us.
Absolutely.
He marked the way. He's the perfecter of the faith because he did this on our behalf.
Absolutely.
I just don't understand that.
Okay, so there's the verse in Mark 10:45 that you use as a bracket over this whole passage we just read. Mark 10:45 says, even the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve and to give his life a ransom in place of many. That is substitution. 10:45 seems quite clear. They're put together with Isaiah 53.
Isaiah 53.
Yes, even if you didn't have Isaiah 53. So I think it was wrong for the Christadelphians to get that wrong, but they haven't changed.
So
The
see,
awful thing about denominations is that once some guru gives them a truth, it's almost irremovable, irremediable. So watch out. Once a guru declares what the truth is, generation after generation will tend to believe that and nothing will budge it. They become incorrigible.
that's one of the blemishes of the Rakovian Catechism, unfortunately.
It
They
is.
teach against this.
That's
I
right.
don't know.
And Christadelphianism to this day does, but then Christadelphianism also teaches there is no devil, you are the devil. Psychologically, that's a great mistake, by the way. People have even committed suicide eventually, thinking they're the devil. That's just plain wrong, and we have to say it's wrong, not do what the Pope says. Well, who am I to judge? We are here to judge. On behalf of Jesus and Paul, who certainly said that homosexuality is a dramatically awful sin. So we have to say that.
So you want to get to the identity of the fallen
Yes,
spirits in
let's just do that.
Christian?
And
Verse
I knew there'd be a lot of stuff here. This is all Christian living, by the way, because you're now understanding what Jesus did. Not only that he died, what else did he do here in this fascinating passage? More disagreement, I think, on this passage than probably only equal to John 1:1. Awful mess. Quite unnecessary, I suggest, but you can check me out on this.
By the way, I'll try and get the comments after because they're a bit off topic right now.
Okay.
I mean, they're on topic, but we passed the couples things, the marriage thing, as you can appreciate a lot of the man and the woman thing. So I'll try and get them at the end, folks. But
Absolutely.
we need to do the Spirit.
Let's do this part about the Spirit. He died for sins. That's very clear. We've done that. The substitutionary atonement, Isaiah 53, once and for all, the just for the unjust. I get it. The just, that's the good people, or the good person in this case, on behalf of the not good people, the unjust. So that he, Jesus, might bring us to God. That's very important. You're not going to get to God, to get a relationship with God, without believing in the substitutionary atonement of Jesus. Now, let's look at the history here. Having been put to death in the flesh, that's to say, as a mortal human being. The flesh is normally mortality, humanity, and so on. Flesh. He was put to death. If you're God, you cannot die. So if you believe that Jesus is God, you've actually put a red line through this passage. Don't do that. Put to death as a human being in the flesh, a mortal human being. But, by contrast, made alive. You see the difference between death and life here? He was made alive in the realm of spirit as an invisible, non-mortal person now. You see the contrast, right? Death to life. He now has a spiritual body. Still a body, but it's spiritual. You don't see it until he shows up. But that's very clear. The contrast is absolutely clear between death and life there. Now, notice that he didn't do anything when he was dead. The idea that Jesus went off to preach to the spirits who are mistranslated now, and now shouldn't be there, he went and did that when he was dead, is flat wrong. When you're dead, you ain't doing nothing. We just read it there. That's clear. People don't understand that, and they traipse into church Sunday after Sunday, and they wonder why it's such a big muddle. Well, of course it is. So he was dead for 3 days, I think from Friday to Sunday, rose again in the Spirit on that Sunday morning, in which condition, right? In that immortalized condition, as a life-imparting Spirit, now immortal, he went off. That's a traveling word, by the way. It means he went off and did something. He moved from one place to another. You see it. It's right here in the context later as well. He went off. He went on a journey, we could say, to do what? To make proclamation to the spirits in prison. Here's the easy fact for you to investigate. Spirits, when used absolutely by itself, not spirits of just men, or my spirit, or God's spirit, but used absolutely without qualification, just spirits, it always means angels or demons. There are no exceptions to that. Always means angels or fallen angels, demons. So these things that he preached to, it's important to get them identified, are not human beings. You cannot call a group of human beings spirits. You cannot say you've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 spirits absolutely in this room. We haven't. If there were 7 angels here, you could certainly say that. 7 angels. If there were 7 demons here, we could say 7 spirits. We could, meaning demons. But you have spirit, but you are not spirit. See the difference? You have a spirit of gentleness. You have a kind spirit, a gentle spirit. All of that is quite clear. And John in one place says, test the spirits. He means test what's coming out of the mouth of human beings. Got it? Spirits are not demons there. Not test the demons or the angels, but test the spirits, meaning test the utterances in that case. So as Bob said so well just recently, these words have different shades of meaning. You need a good lexicon to go through all this. It's a task. You need a standard lexicon, preferably Hebrew or Greek, if you can manage that, to see what these various words mean. So spirits here would be fallen angels. And that is made entirely clear. Because he then says, who? These are personalities, but they're spirits. What about them in verse 20? They were once disobedient. I get it. They were bad things, weren't they? They weren't good people. They weren't good people at all. They were bad spirits, in fact, who were disobedient. And then more information. When? We've got who and when. Isn't that amazing? Not only who are they, but when did they do what they did? When the patience of God kept waiting the days of Noah, my goodness. During, there's another time word, construction of the ark, in which a few, in the ark that is, 8 persons were brought safely through the water. Now he's talking about persons, and he's using the word souls there quite deliberately. Before that, he used the word spirits, which, used absolutely without qualification, means demonic fallen spirits. There's such a huge fuss about this, it makes me wonder if there isn't some serious Christian living here involved. What you're being led into is the worst catastrophe in human history, the flood, right? What was responsible for that flood was the awful event where some angels cohabited with women. That disrupted the whole human race. Now look at the news today. We're getting in a muddle over gender, aren't we? This is a catastrophe for the human race. You start mixing and muddling those things, you're in bad trouble.
Some commentators connect the captive spirits,
yes,
or these captives in prison, to Luke 4:18.
Okay.
Where Jesus comes out of the desert endowed with the Spirit.
Yeah.
And he says, the Spirit of the Lord is on me, anointed me to proclaim the gospel to the poor, and to proclaim to captives. He has sent me to proclaim that captives will be released.
Okay. But that's not spirits. He doesn't say, I'm preaching to spirits. Well, all human beings are captives to sin, we get that. He's coming to preach the gospel to human beings. And here he's announcing his triumph to the fallen spirits. So this is not spirits without qualification, even in that passage. Here they are spirits who were disobedient when the ark was being prepared. Well, certainly there were human beings who were disobedient. There were at the time. However, Jesus wasn't alive at that time. So he couldn't have been doing the preaching. You see the sequence there? He died, he rose, and in that risen condition, he went off and preached to the spirits in prison who were disobedient in the time of Noah. It doesn't say that Jesus did it before he was born, does it? Hardly. The sequence is quite clear. Died, rose in spirit. In that spirit condition, he then took a journey to preach to spirits who had been disobedient at the time of the ark. There's a perfectly good reference for that, Genesis 6.
I'll just connect these the spirits to Hebrews 12:23.
Yes.
So I'm reading Vincent's word studies. As in Hebrews 12:23 of disembodied spirits, and Hebrews 12:23 to the assembly of the firstborn enrolled in heaven, to God the judge of all, and to the spirits of the righteous made perfect. Okay,
and that exactly is precisely the point I just made. The spirits used absolutely means demons, right? The spirits of just men is not spirits used absolutely, is it clear? Jesus said in the Gospels, in fact 40 times in the Gospels, the spirits of the demons. It's quite clear. On one occasion they came back and said, Lord, even the spirits are subject to us, right? Demons. So my point still stands. The word spirits, pneumata, plural of pneuma, always means not human beings.
Another comment, I'm just throwing this out. Matthew Poole's commentary.
Yes.
The spirit, souls of man departed, Ecclesiastes 12:7. Then shall the dust return to the earth.
Yes.
The spirit shall return to God.
Yeah, that's feeble.
Acts 7:59. They stoned Stephen, calling on God, saying, Lord Jesus, receive my spirit.
Yes, notice my spirit, that's qualified. That's not spirit without qualification. My spirit, that's clear. You have spirit, but you are not spirit. So none of those will break the rule that I just gave. And Stephen there is saying, oh God, receive me. That's actually the effect of what you could do even without dying. Let's give that verse. Is it in Psalm 31? Sarah, you have that one?
Which one?
There's a nice verse there.
Into your hands I commit my spirit.
Into your hands I commit my spirit. That's a good verse.
Psalm 31:5.
That's right, thank you. David there, who was not dying even, says, into your hands I commit really myself, my spirit, my mental disposition, my mind, my personality. That is not spirit without qualification. It's the spirit of me. So the rule still stands firm that spirits used without a my or of just men means demons. We're rejoicing because the demons are subject. Jesus said that. Be happy not only that the demons are subject to you, but that your names are enrolled in the book of life in heaven. Isn't that great? Be happy about this. This is Christian living, folks. It's doctrine, if you like, but you're supposed to understand what God is doing. That's a major part of being
Can you
Christian.
comment on some translations, early translate like the Syriac,
Yeah.
translate prison there,
Mhm.
the spirits in prisons, as shell.
That's wrong.
Why is that wrong?
Well, because it's in Tartarus. It could be the lower part of Sheol. We'll look another week at 2 Peter 2, where those angels were put into Tartarus, which is the lower level of Sheol, if you like.
This Jude,
Yes.
six,
Jude 6 and 2 Peter 2. This is a massive subject, please note. Genesis 6, right? This is the point at which the human race really fell apart, and Jesus and the New Testament warn that when the flood comes, when it came, right, that was the end of that civilization. Second coming is like the flood. It's the end of that civilization. And it is aided and abetted by false sexual relationships. We've seen that,
Since
homosexuality.
we're there, I'll just share the Peter one.
Yeah.
Anthony.
2 Peter 2, 4.
For if God did not spare angels when they sinned, but cast them down to Tartarus,
Yes.
and committed them to pits of darkness to be reserved for judgment,
Right.
and did not spare the ancient world, but protected Noah with 7 others,
Mm-hmm.
a preacher of uprightness.
Mm-hmm.
So it's wrong to change Tartarus to Shell.
Yes. And
Yeah,
there's
some do apparently manuscripts in the
yeah, one of them did. That's
translation.
just wrong. No, you can't mix and muddle like that. These are angels. In fact, he lists them separately. Angels who sinned, followed by Noah's people who sinned, right? It's a clear sequence.
In the Septuagint,
Yeah.
spirits are angels.
Spirits are angels?
Sorry, that's another.
Spirits are angels.
No, I'm confusing something.
Spirits are angels in Hebrews 1. Are not the angels ministering spirits? Clearly, right? So fallen angels are spirits and good holy angels are also spirits. But you are not spirits. You have spirit. God has spirit, but he's not spirit. The only exception then would be Jesus, who is a life-imparting spirit now, spirit person. And you, when immortalized, will be spirit persons, if you like. Still visible, still tangible.
Still with bodies.
Still with bodies. Still
Spirit
have
is
some
not
bodies.
the opposite of
Yeah.
body.
Yeah.
This is the idea that is prevalent. That
That's right.
spirit means no
Yes.
body,
That's right.
or it's the opposite of body.
Yeah.
The only time you will be a nobody is when you're dead.
When you're dead, right.
Anthony, what do you mean by life imparting?
Life imparting spirit. It means that he is a spiritual person, immortalized, and he's able to convey that spirit and to impart it to others, then, which he did when he was alive too, by the way. The words that I speak to you, Jesus said, are spirit, are life. They impart spirit and impart life. He's doing that all the more, presumably, now that he's immortalized.
I don't know if Ephesians
Yeah.
4 might help here.
Yes.
Kate, let's see. 4 says
Mm-hmm.
that
Is there?
Ephesians 4, the Lord is one person, our faith in him is one, and there is one baptism, one God, Father, and so
Mhm.
on. To each of us grace was given in proportion to Messiah's generous gift. As Scripture says, when he ascended to the heights,
Good.
he took captives with him and gave gifts to humanity.
Mm-hmm.
So he is the like I said before, he's the means, the
Dispensing
vehicle through which the Spirit of God
Yeah.
now is working,
Okay.
right?
That's
I
right.
mean,
Yeah.
in Revelation, we forget this, by the way.
Mhm.
In Revelation, it's the angel of Jesus,
Yes.
usually speaking.
Yes.
But sometimes it's the Spirit itself. It says the Spirit
Yes.
says to the churches.
Right.
So it's all coming. He's the vehicle. I mean,
He's the
that's only
vehicle of the
word.
Spirit, certainly. So life imparting would be
He's imparting gifts
Giving.
to us, to the church.
absolutely.
and
Okay,
Yes, I
but
think so.
when Christians
Yeah.
are resurrected,
Yes.
what will they become?
I think they will become life-imparting spirits too,
Okay.
immortalized human beings. Why not? I don't know what else you would be. You're an immortal man.
Well, you'll have all the gifts. You'll be like Jesus.
Yeah, I know.
I
We're
would
supposed to
think
be
that.
like Jesus, and I didn't know about the life imparting.
I would think it's the same idea because
It's-
what
He
else?
must be. He's the one that he searches everything. It says as
Yeah.
well. Revelation. I mean, He's the man.
He is the man. We tend, I think, as Unitarians, sometimes to diminish the position of Jesus, and this puts it right. He went off and preached to these spirits who were disobedient at the time of Noah. They were put in Tartarus, which is a lower level of Hades, waiting for final judgment. Remember, the demons said, "Have you come to torture us before the time?" That suggests there are demons both in Tartarus and others who are free. There are two. Jews recognize that. Some of the demons are in prison waiting final judgment. Others are very much alive and well in the sublunar space. So our battle in Ephesians 5 is not against flesh and blood, i.e. human beings. Not essentially. It doesn't mean it isn't against that, right? Not essentially. People stumble at that. No, not human beings. No. Not essentially, not finally and absolutely against human beings, but against exactly this cosmic chaos in heavenly places. So you better arm yourself with spiritual gifts and spiritual resistance.
Another one I would use, Kate, is Hebrews 1. I love what you said. We tend to minimize Jesus as biblical Unitarians, whereas Unitarians in general, and that was a big mistake of Socinians coming up through history. Then they rationalize their way out of faith. But
that's right.
Hebrews 1, God appointed him, Jesus, heir of everything. Through him the ages.
Yeah.
And then verse 3 is incredible. He's the radiance of the glory of God, the visible image of God.
Yes.
If you see me, you see God.
Yes.
And this is the clincher to me. He now sustains everything by his powerful command.
Yes.
Or by the power of his word, some translations.
That's right.
I mean, now.
That's a mighty position.
I mean, that is, that's God-like.
Super God-like, yes. Absolutely.
And then after he had provided cleansing for sin, he sat down at the right hand of the Majesty. So there's still a capital M Majesty up there. And he was promoted to a position higher than any angel. That's why he's not an angel.
So the angels are spirits in 1:14, right? What are the angels? It says the angels are ministering. That's nice. You've got a whole bunch of angels here tending to you. And each person has his own angel, probably, that's said in the Gospels. There's an angel sent to the Gospels.
Questions here, Anthony? Sorry, folks online. Dan Shaw, the demons in Tartarus.
Yes.
So they cannot tempt, influence in any way?
I would think not, no. But there are demons also who are loose already. That's a bit more obscure. But I don't think so. When they're in Tartarus, they're waiting. Jesus then finally in this passage makes this announcement. He's not preaching salvation to them. I don't think they're offered salvation. But he's announcing his triumph. He takes this journey to preach to the spirits in prison, the demons, to say he is now in charge of all authority under God, which is huge, isn't it? I think we don't estimate that highly enough. Then he says, finishing here, corresponding to this, the water and the flood and all that, baptism now saves you. Not just the washing of the flesh with water, obviously, but for the answer or the appeal, probably the answer of a good conscience before God is the right translation there. So how important is baptism? Currently we're undergoing a struggle from some say baptism doesn't matter. That's fundamentally false, very dangerous, because obedience is what gives you salvation, Hebrews 5:9. You shake your fist at baptism, you're in bad trouble. You don't get baptized, you're not a member of the church. No New Testament would writer could consider an unbaptized person. They could be coming along as disciples and all that, but until they're baptized in water, they've not taken the step that joins them to the body of Christ. That's what he says about baptism now saves you. It's an issue of salvation, not just removing dirt from the flesh, but an appeal to God for a good conscience. Isn't that nice? A good conscience. We all need that. Through the resurrection of Jesus Christ, who's supervising all this from his risen position. Who is at the right hand of God, Psalm 101. Psalm 101, he's the second Lord there, my Lord. Mistranslated, capital L, massive thing. Having travelled, same word. Having travelled into heaven, that's what he's done, to sit at the right hand of the Father. After angels, including the demons that he went to preach to, and authorities and powers had been subjected to it. Isn't that marvellous? That is just a huge thing. Fox News is not doing much with this. What happened to them? Come on. How about the Pope? Why isn't he explaining this to us? There isn't a lot of good explanation going on out there. I didn't learn nothing about nothing in my experience. What happened? They didn't know either. So let's get to them and help them to see some of this.
You know, Anthony, we've talked a lot about these gurus that have affected so many people. me, the one that is affected more than any is Plato.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. Who was a homosexual. He's favouring the love of little boys by men. That's a bad sort. You need to look at your guru and say, what sort of person is this? You look at fake Dr. Werewolf, who has caused inestimable damage with the nonsense he taught about all nine all the time. You have all the gifts all the time. Don't need to be baptized, but you've got all the gifts. It is fundamentally wrong. We come along trying to pick up the pieces, and believe me, it's very hard to rescue people from Plato, isn't it? We didn't even know that Plato was involved, but now with Keegan's book and so on we do. It's a good point. And the devil is behind all that, isn't he? He's a master a trick master of a very refined sort. Okay, I'm sorry we had a lot of stuff there earlier we didn't get to, but I knew this would be a big subject.
I don't know if we got time for some.
Maybe.
Michelle brought up earlier to go back to the marriage and couples and women wearing hold systems, as we know, have been created on the foundation of passages like earlier in Peter it talks about women shouldn't wear jewelry.
Oh, that's silly.
And whole systems, as we know, Pentecostalism, they don't even allow women to wear makeup, don't cut your hair, so...
Yeah.
Rory has a good comment on that. Verse 3, this verse does not prohibit all jewelry. If it did, it would also prohibit all clothing.
Good point.
Because it mentions dresses.
Yes.
So.
That's a great point. Just say that Pentecostalism is one of the most dangerously non-spiritual things you can do. The claim is, look at all these gifts I've got. I've got the so-called gift of languages, which hasn't been proved. And then I'm going to tell you exactly how long your sleeves can be. That is the fiercest form of spirit killer. You really want to kill the spirit, you make rules and laws against alcohol that the Bible doesn't make, etc., etc. That's what Pentecostals do particularly well.
Yeah, legalism.
Legalism
there are different
is their favorite
types
thing.
of legalism, Sabbatarianism and Pentecostalism.
That's right.
Randy, so Paul calls the woman here the weaker sex.
Yes.
So Randy is trying to understand other passages where Paul says in 1 Timothy 2, it was not Adam who was deceived, but the woman being deceived fell into transgression.
Yes.
Not sure how to interpret this. And then Michelle said that she has been taught that the woman by nature is more easily deceived, that maybe that's why Satan went to her. But I'm not sure if I agree with that, says Michelle. So I don't know what
I'm not sure. I'd have to see what the rabbi said about that too. Not that they're infallible. It does suggest the devil went for the weaker one there. More appealing in some way. The temptation was to... I don't know.
So Paul, here in Peter, where it says the woman is the weaker sex, we can string those two in Genesis?
I think you could. Maybe? I wouldn't be dogmatic. You can. Paul very carefully goes on to say that no man arrives in the world without a woman. He goes on to balance it very nicely in that passage.
Not even Jesus.
Yes, not even Jesus. So, obviously, different cultures will read this through different eyes. We do our best. Do we get it exactly right? I don't think we do. Probably should do.
Why to the demons, spirits, why would God only imprison those demons
I don't know.
Not all?
I have no idea.
Or most of the demons?
Yeah, some of them, they're in two divisions. Some are in Tartarus, that's expressly said, waiting judgment. Jesus preached to those, announcing his triumph. He's in charge. It's fun to be in charge of everything, isn't it? How would you like to be in charge of everything? That would be a very satisfactory position to be in.
They were so bad because the flood was such a disastrous event. They were more evil than...
It was caused by the mixing of the two, let's call them species, that weren't supposed to mix.
Yes.
So it was so bad that...
Produced giants. The offspring are the demons, probably. The offspring of the giants are probably the demons.
So those spirits needed to be imprisoned.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Can you give us a rough idea of how many people died in the flood? Because we know it was catastrophic, but
population.
there is a figure.
I'm sure
we don't even know
calculated.
Yes, it has been calculated.
Several million at least, I don't I don't know. It's a good
The
point.
thing about the Nephilim,
Oh, yeah.
I don't know if you agree with Heiser. Michelle has talked about Heiser, and I did look into Heiser.
Yeah.
I think it is good to look at his book, The Unseen
Mhm.
Realm.
I've heard of that, yes.
He is a staunch Trinity, don't get me wrong.
Yeah.
At one point in one of the videos, I almost vomited when he said, well, you know, because he's against the fact that evangelicals are trying to take away the supernatural nature of Genesis 6
Okay.
by pointing to, oh, there were the sons of Seth or the daughters
Right, yes,
of
good.
whoever.
He's
He
with
says,
us.
I don't like that.
Good.
But then in that video, he said, because we believe in supernatural things, like God passing through the birth canal. So,
Yeah.
anyway, just keep that in mind. Disclaimer again.
That's right.
Heiser, though. But
Yeah.
he makes a good point that Nephilim
Yeah.
should not be translated fallen ones, as if it's applied to humans. And he makes a point about that.
Yeah.
So I put a little video
Good.
I cut up of it. Just to finish up, Randy, can we connect 2 Peter 3:18, growing the grace and knowledge
Yeah.
of our Lord, Savior Jesus,
Mhm.
with the Isaiah 53:11 by his knowledge?
Oh, I would think so,
So
absolutely.
2 Peter 3:18
Yes.
with...
That would be a nice application. 53:11 is a totally unused text by most. By his knowledge, my servant, God talking, my suffering servant Jesus, will make many right. Oh, we don't need knowledge. I need Christian living. I don't need all this head knowledge. That's also fights against that easy text. 53:11, use that all the time, right? The suffering servant, by his knowledge, makes people right. So it's false to say, well, I just need Christian living, I don't need any knowledge. That's just false. It's one of the devil's big propaganda marks, I would
Well,
think.
isn't that Daniel 12 too?
Exactly the same in Daniel 12, I was going to mention that also. By his knowledge. Daniel is particularly important since, as I keep saying, Daniel 12, 1, 2, 3 is a Bible master key on prophecy. Work at that time, at that time, at that time. If people believed that, there'd be no chaos over eschatology at all, but they don't.
Verse 3, but those with insight
Yes.
shall shine brightly
Yes.
like the splendor of the firmament, and those who lead the many to justice
Good.
shall be like the stars
Exactly so.
forever.
Right? Those who make many right will shine like the stars forever. Same language exactly as Isaiah 53:11, quoting it in fact.
All
Okay,
right.
it's very good. Well, thanks to all the people out there listening patiently.